Hello again. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about writing a critical affirmative. Before I dive too deep in this video, I do want to say that this isn't a one-way tutorial in order to do this. This is some of the critical questions that I ask myself when thinking about how to write these affirmatives, and therefore isn't conclusive. The beauty behind being able to write arguments like this is that you can do it in a variety of ways that sit and kind of think through your own personal perspective for how you can think through different things that are happening in the world and that are relevant. And so this isn't a conclusive tutorial, rather it is one that raises relevant questions to the types of things you should be considering when you write the affirmative and the types of things that could be helpful when thinking about an overall structure for you to make this argument come off as persuasive as possible. The first place I want to start is that I think every good criticism needs to start with a criticism of the world, which is something that you may have heard me say in other videos. But basically, I think that starting off with a critique of the world is important because it allows you to think about how the world is currently operating that you believe is unethical or wrong, and why the current institutions that are empowered, at least by the resolution, i.e. usually the United States federal government or other governmental bodies, are not able to resolve the type of issue that you are citing. So basically it is one that I think that should be historically accurate and allows you to pull from various examples, both domestically and internationally, if you really wanted to have some historical weight, in order for you to be able to think through what about the world currently makes it unethical and creates a source of violence for marginalized communities that you are trying to highlight, or creates an overall schema that inflicts everyone in the world that you think that should be something that we should think differently about or try to move against in a way that is produced through the kind of method stuff that we'll talk about a little bit later. This criticism of the world, I think, is extremely important as a starting point because it allows you to give an overall basis and overall framing of how the current way that things are happening are both unethical, but also why they need to be changed. It sets up a uniqueness, a barrier that the AF needs to overcome. The second thing that you need is a critique of the resolution and a critique of debate. Sometimes these two things can be done at the same time, and sometimes these things need to be done separately. It can depend, but both are legitimate strategies. In terms of critique of the resolution, I think there are a couple ways that you can critique the resolution. First, I think you could critique the very writing of the resolution, i.e. how the resolution is written, what types of ideas and methods it includes, i.e. if the resolution is only written in order to include an interpretation of power that solely focuses on the law and instrumental authority over the law, then that could be a source of criticism over the resolution because you could make arguments about how it stops other sources from political agency from being able to be active in policymaking, to be active in how we think about the creation of the world around us, and what that means about the relevancy of the education that is being passed through the resolution, and what type of education is or is not permitted under it. That critique of the resolution is similar to a critique of debate in that your critique of debate should also be a critique of what types of arguments and ideas are prioritized by the types of models that we form in debate. What idea about normal speakers and normal thoughts do we produce in such a way that you think actively stop the production of knowledge about the type of community, the type of violence, or the type of knowledge that you want to highlight. This critique of the resolution, critique of debate is also incredibly important because it will inevitably be the type of questions that you need to answer when dealing with things like framework, when dealing with framework arguments that you want to make against other criticisms, when dealing with how you should relate to arguments such as disads, etc. A framework critique of debate is extremely important because it allows the judge to have conclusive answers about the relationship between the type of critique of the world that you are making above and the way that relates to what is happening right in front of them. The next thing that every critical affirmative needs is a method. In terms of method, there are a lot of options, obviously, that you could take. In terms of how you think about this, I think that there are the good tips on how you are able to find methods in this type of context are you should try to find methods that, once again, are historically good, that allow you to pull examples that can help people better understand the type of modeling that you want to happen, the type of research that you want to happen, or the type of organizing that you think is the most beneficial. I think either that or a descriptive way in which people are able to come together in order to make the process of the AF happen. This means that whatever research practice you focus, or whatever type of subject formation argument you're making, or if you have methods for how people should really be organizing and doing activist work, all those things require you to be able to paint a vivid image to the judge about how people are able to come together to overcome the barriers that you isolated per your critique of the world and your critique of the resolution and debate. It is also incredibly important that you're able to tie that method to the question that you're raising about debate. Why is it particularly important that the method that you're offering does something according to the way that debate is currently being done or to the way that the resolution is currently being studied. This question is incredibly relevant because, once again, it's one of those things that allows you to further easier get to answering questions about framer while simultaneously having a framing argument from the very beginning of the debate that the judge can take with him to the end of the debate, no matter what the other team decides to read. And so having an extremely strong framing argument can be very important in terms of how you build your method and how you think about your method's relationship to things like debate. The last thing that you need, and the last thing that I try to consider when thinking about critical asks, is the purpose of performance. Now, I am a firm believer that everything is performance because debate is a speech activity, but there are performative elements to certain critical asks that make them relevant, i.e. the presencing of music, the presencing of acting, of different forms of art and media that can make your arguments come off as really dynamic. A lot of times there are people that sometimes are undercited in understanding the value of a performance in the affirmative. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the ways that you can use different performances in the affirmative in order to make your arguments sound really good, in order to make them more persuasive, in order to make your arguments make more sense to judges. The first reason why I think that you could have a performance in the app is if you have evidence that is already written in the context of your method that says something about the presence of a particular type of art, media, or performance that does well in exemplifying what your method does. Sometimes that can be used in the context of hip hop or music or drawings or different types of mediums that are able to show the ways in which different methods are able to take up. Historically, this has shown itself in debate through the presence of things like music to explain arguments, such as Black rage to explain arguments, such as the way that we should relate to each other, the types of ways that we can build relationships with each other, and how we can think about pedagogy and learning differently. Various arguments that are made about pedagogical differences between critical methods and the types of arguments that are made under a more instrumental understanding of power make lots of arguments about why performative elements are incredibly key to reinterpreting how we think about power and how we have discourse that is able to become more accessible to various communities, which is the second point that I wanted to make about performances in terms of the app. One of the primary second reasons that I think it can be important to perform in the context of a critical affirmative is the question of accessibility. How do you make the world that you want to be relevant to what judges think more accessible in terms of how you show them the type of advocacy that you're doing? Performances in terms of poems, in terms of lines that are repeated, in terms of different literary forces that you could use in order to show off the types of arguments that you're making can be incredibly persuasive because it allows you to make connections with judges that show them the way that your method offers a different way of learning and understanding the world that sometimes cannot be encapsulated by just a reading of tags and evidence. All these things are really valuable things to consider when thinking about how you should be writing your own critical app, and performances can always be useful just to make your app come off as more dynamic and to grab the attention of the people that are listening to it so that they can listen to the fine details that you really want to take with them into the rest of the debate. It can create memorable moments that they're able to take all the way into their RFD that can be incredibly relevant when they're thinking about how they want to consider your app as it relates to other arguments that are being made by the other team. Hopefully these are some questions and ideas that you found really helpful in thinking about how you should be writing a critical app, and hopefully it gave you at least a structure that you could use to develop arguments further when you're thinking about how to write your own affirmative. Thank you so much for listening. Have a nice time. Bye.